I hope you're doing well. I wanted to do a little more in our PowerPoint talking about the history of ancient Rome. We've taken a look at some of the beginnings of ancient Rome, and we're going to see some events taking place that will bring about what's known as the Roman Republic. These will be happening very early in the history of Rome. Once they have solidified um, part of their control over the city, they're then going to expand out from the city of Rome, from that central area, and will come to take control of all the Latin tribes and then the other areas in the peninsula. Very pivotal event for the Romans is to know that Rome was ruled by an Etruscan tyrant or a king. In Latin, the word king is rex, R-E-X, rex. The Roman emperors took many, many titles, scores of them. I don't even know how many, 40, 50 different titles they would call themselves. One title they will never take is Rex or King. Kings were hated. The idea of a king was hated. And so even though we might say a Roman emperor was functioning like a king, the Romans would have never, certainly the emperor would have never called him a king. He may have been accused of being a king. That would have been an insult. The last of the Etruscan kings or tyrants was overthrown in 509 BC, another pivotal date in the history of Rome. This is the beginning of the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic really was idealized even during the Roman Empire. The emperor, for example, Augustus and others, would basically claim that they had preserved the empire, the republic, while of course creating an empire. Um, it was kind of a fiction which they all lived with. The idea that they actually lived in a republic, even though it was an empire. But of course, the trappings of the republic will be gone in the empire period. But the king is overthrown in 509. This enters a period of history known as the Roman Republic, and it will be this until the rise of Augustus Caesar, or some might say Julius Caesar. So the Republic begins, and we want to take a brief look at some of this today. One of the things we have to know, and one of the things you've been reading in the Shelton book, as well as your main text, Cam, is that the Romans had a very structured view of society and of the family and of life. In the United States, we have the idea that we have mobility socially, that you can change your position in life. You may start off poor, maybe born to a poor and uneducated family, but someday you could become president or something like that. You could raise your standard of living. You could become a millionaire. You could become one of the top social movers and shakers in American society. Romans had no such delusions, no such aspirations. You were born to a particular station in life, and to that you would stay. And they were originally divided into not only families. We like to think of the family, which, perhaps we think of a husband, a wife, and children as a family, or maybe an extended family, which would include grandparents, maybe even uncles, aunts, that sort of thing, cousins. But the Romans had a far more delineated society. But the family was the unit. In fact, our word family comes from the Latin word familia, which is the Roman word for family. But the family was the smallest sort of clans, and there were tribes. This was a very stratified society. Now, the leader of the family was known as the pater familias. Pater familias. Pater in Latin means father. Familias is family, so he's the father of the family. He's the head of the family. Now, of course, when we think of, say, perhaps the father of the family, okay, perhaps we think the father has certain role, maybe certain authority, but within the Roman family, the pater familias was the controller of the family. He had all the power. In fact, he had the power of life and death. He could have someone killed or killed someone in his family, and he would not be charged with murder or any crime, because this was his prerogative as head of the family. Power of life and death. Now, Rome was also divided not only by what we might call bloodlines, but within those bloodlines there were social classes. There were the upper families, the most powerful families or tribes or clans. These were called the patricians. Patricians, then, the upper class, were the only ones who could become senators. They were really the only ones who were going to run the government and have power and authority in that way. The other group of people, the common folk, were the plebeians. Sometimes we have used, or you might hear somebody use the word plebes. Somebody's a plebe. They used to use this on college campuses, especially ones that had sororities and fraternities, and a plebe was someone who was a very low level, pledging a sorority or fraternity, that sort of thing. They're a plebe because they're not really a member of the society yet. Anyway, these are the common people in Roman society. Now, of course, the tension between the patricians and the plebeians leads to much social tension between them. Much social tension. Because, unlike, say, in the United States, where we would say everybody's equal, at least in theory, everyone is equal, everyone has the same rights and all that sort of thing. Romans had no such idea. Patricians had certain roles, certain privileges, certain things, and plebeians were not a part of that. In fact, there were laws which prohibited patricians and plebeians from getting married. So these laws then will eventually break down, but this is the way it is at the beginning. And we'll be able to talk briefly about it. And in your textbook reading, you're going to run across some of this too. We don't, in this online course, I don't like to do as long of PowerPoints each time. So I try to summarize a bit. Now, 509, the beginning of the Roman Republic. Remember, the Romans are really a part of the Latin the Latins, the Latin peoples or tribes. By 509 or shortly thereafter, Rome will come to control the other Latin areas which are surrounding the area of Rome. These other Latin people all speak the same language, Latin, but they're not all the same people. So the Romans, very specifically, a small group at this time, but then now they come to control the Latins. The Latin League then is under the Roman control, and through that Latin League, Rome will then begin to conquer the rest of the Italian peninsula, and will eventually take control of the Italian peninsula. They'll do this through fighting a series of wars. For example, they fight the Etruscans, defeat them by 396 BC, and that's territory to the north of Rome. Further north are the Gauls. They will fight the Gauls then, defeating them by 387. That takes them up close to, that is Roman territory, close to the Alps. The Latin League will also have an internal fight here in the 4th century, 340 to 338. Eventually then the Latin League will be dissolved, which basically means Rome's going to control it directly. Shortly thereafter will be 3 wars, and we won't go through all the details of these, but there are 3 wars with people known as the Samnites. Samnites lived in the mountains, the Apennine Mountains, to the south and to the east of Rome. They'll conquer the Samnites in a series of battles and take control of that territory. So, here we see 3 Samnite wars from 330 to 290. Second Samnite War, the first one about 330 to 328, 327, 326 to 304. The Second Samnite War is critical or important because we see the Romans moving further south. This will bring them then adjacent to the territory of Neapolis. Neapolis is actually a Greek phrase, nea, for like neo, which means new, and polis in Greek, which means city. The new city, we call it Naples today, and that's really where the word Naples comes from, is Neapolis. Well, at any rate, this is controlled by the Greeks. So we see then when the Romans move into Neapolis and take it over, this is going to threaten the Samnites even more. And this will lead to a third and final Samnite War, 298 to 290. It's clear at this point, of course, I think to everyone, that Rome, the Romans, desire to control all the Italian peninsula. They're not going to be satisfied with just Rome or just central part of Italy or the northern part. They want the entire peninsula. And so we see then the Etruscans, those who are left, and the Gauls who are left to the north will form an alliance to try to keep the Romans in check. But of course, eventually they will fail. So that's a spoiler alert. Here's a map that shows us some of these territories we've been talking about. Here is Rome, as you can see. Here are the Latins. Here are the Etruscan territories, as you can see to the north. Others that we haven't mentioned, like the Umbrians. But here are the Samnites. And then all this area you see down here, and the boot, the toe, and even part of the Sicily, this is all Greek territory, including Naples and the area to the south. So the Romans then are going to come to the southern part of Italy, Bay of Naples or Neapolis. Now when the Romans come to the south, they encounter, of course, the Greeks. The Greeks have been here for a long time. The Greeks settled in the southern part of the Italian peninsula and on the island of Sicily and elsewhere in the 7th century. That means in the 600 BCs. This comes during a Greek expansion where they in fact expand all around the Mediterranean. And so they are well established here. Largest city, probably the most important one, would be Syracuse down here on the island of Sicily. But of course Neapolis was an important one as well. What the Greeks did was establish colonies. The Greeks had some unity between them, but they're rather independently minded people. So this means that Athens would start its colonies, Corinth would start its colonies, and so on. And so when these colonies were started, then they functioned independently as well. So in the south, while you see lots of Greek cities down here, much of them are functioning on their own and independently in the south. So very little unity. This, of course, is going to open the door then for Roman control, because these Greek cities sometimes squabbled with each other, and since they were not strongly unified, it'll lead to the opportunity for the Romans to come to control the southern part. In fact, the Greeks controlled this so much, this was called Magna Gracchi, or Greater Greece. Here's a map that shows us Greek colonies in the 7th century. So you can see, here's the main area of Greece: Athens, Corinth, Sparta, Thebes. You ought to recognize those names. But they're going to begin to colonize way up around the Black Sea. Very fertile land up there for farming, a lot of good fishing. They would come along the coast. Of course, they were already along the coast, partially of Turkey, what would be Turkey today. They're down. Nicomedes is a Greek city in Egypt. Cyrenaica in North Africa. Out in Spain, around Barcelona, the southern area of France. And then, of course, the area we're most concerned with right now: Corsica, Sardinia, Sicily, and the southern part of Italy, Taranto. See, Taranto, very important Greek city, and Syracuse. These are all Greek colonies. Well, we go to Taranto then. You see where it is. Because Taranto will then be, Taranto or Tarentum was the chief Greek city in southern Italy. And you can sort of see the map here to get the idea that it was a nice harbor area, very strategic pass that's here. Of course, the chief city in Sicily was Syracuse, as we've already mentioned. And there was a rivalry between these two cities. Who was the most powerful in the west? This rivalry then will open the door, as we're going to see, for the Romans to come in, a wedge. The two Greek cities are in dispute. One side asked the Romans to come in and help us solve this dispute. The Romans were more than enough happy to do this. Of course, you have to be careful when you ask somebody for help, especially the government or government officials or military, because a lot of times when they come in, they simply don't leave. This is why, if I hear a knock on the door and then somebody says, "Hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you," I do not answer the door. In fact, I make sure it's locked. I go out the back door. I get out of there. Hopefully they'll leave. Because a lot of times when people come to help you, they say they're coming to help you. They in fact are coming to take over. And that's what the Romans were doing. The Romans moved their troops in. Eventually some Roman ships attacked Tarentum. And because of the dispute, Rome said we had to send our ships in, and that some of our material was damaged. And so then they asked them for a payment. It's like war reparations. You need to pay us for the damage you did to us, even though some might say we attacked them, the Romans attacked them. But at any rate, we won't go into all the details here, but the Romans get involved in this dispute, and it opens the door for them to come in and take over, which is what they do. When, of course, Tarentum refuses to pay, well, war breaks out between Rome and Tarentum and those in the south. Tarentum is going to ask for help. They're going to ask for help from this man over here. His name is Pyrrhus. 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 Pyrrhus lives on mainland Greece, because remember, by the time you're getting to this point of things, in the 3rd century BC, of course, Alexander the Great is long gone. The unity of the Greeks is long gone. And a lot of people wanted to be the next Alexander. And so Pyrrhus wanted to be the next one. He's looking for an excuse himself to come to Italy and exert his control over the Greek territories in Italy. So he comes hoping to be like Alexander. He brings with him 25,000 troops, which is sizable, including 20 elephants. Elephants are interesting if you study the history of elephants in military action. Alexander the Great encountered elephants in Italy, or excuse me, in India, not in Italy. Of course, Pyrrhus is going to bring elephants with him to Italy. And this is where we see elephants entering into a military setting. They use them much like a tank. Evidently, horses don't like elephants much because elephants are much bigger than them. And elephants can move surprisingly fast when they want to over a short period. So horses are intimidated by them. In fact, according to some sources, once horses know the smell of elephants, the next time they encounter elephants, they're rather nervous about it. At any rate, he brings the elephants with him and a sizable force. He wins several early battles against the Romans around 280 BC, but he suffers heavy losses even though he wins the battle. So this develops then a phrase that we come to know, known as a Pyrrhic victory. It comes from Pyrrhus's name, Pyrrhic victory, or a hollow victory. In other words, you win the battle, but you're going to lose the war because you had such heavy losses. A hollow victory. He's defeated by 265 BC. But it takes a while. It takes 15 years. They're fighting Pyrrhus and fighting in the south. Of course, once he is defeated, this will then put the Romans over in control of the Greek territories in the southern part of Italy, but also the Greek territories on the island of Sicily. And the Greeks controlled about half of the island of Sicily. The other half of the island of Sicily were controlled by the Carthaginians. And this will, so we actually see the Carthaginians and the Romans are allies against the Greeks on the island of Sicily. But of course, once the Greeks are gone, now the tension between them grows. This is really a principle of history we see over and over again. My enemy's enemy is my friend. And then once our common enemy is gone, then what's our relationship? It often becomes tense. For example, some people were very surprised to hear that, for example, somebody like Osama bin Laden had once been an ally of the United States, or the U.S. had helped him. The U.S. helped him because he was fighting the Russians in Afghanistan. So my enemy's enemy is my friend. We help him out. Obviously, we did not remain friendly. Same with Saddam Hussein. And it could be repeated many, many times. Well, Rome will then come in control of all of Italy south of the river called the Rubicon. And this puts them in a good position.